Hi, everybody. Yep. Get on. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our first in-person school board meeting for open government since March of 2020. This is the Untitled School District Finance Committee meeting. It's August 18, 2021. And I will call the meeting to order. Just a reminder that while we're here in the high school building, masks are required at all times. So starting with announcements, I do have an announcement to read, a prepared statement. The district employs professionals for the design and construction of facilities. Change order before the board is item C on tonight's agenda must be approved in order to comply with the court order. Following this statement, and until further notice, neither the board nor administration will discuss the matter in public as it may be the subject of litigation. Specifically, we seek to understand why the auditorium was deemed to be inaccessible despite employing professionals to ensure such compliance and to recover the costs associated with this change. Both the board and administration expect Sandy Run Middle School to comply fully with ADA requirements. Thank you. Are there any other announcements?
I do not have any.
Okay, thank you. So, we do have minutes from our June 17th meeting. Members of the committee have had the opportunity to review those minutes. Any comments or anything from about those minutes from the committee? Are we all prepared to review those minutes? Okay, so those minutes are approved and will appear on the Monday night agenda at the legislative meeting and informational items. Jumping right into the reports and recommendations, we have a Sandy Run update. Mr. Westman.
Yes, since we last met, a lot of work is still taking place. The roof is 100% complete. The building is watertight. There are a few areas of the building where the exterior walls aren't open, but that's being done on purpose to get heavy equipment through. The cafeteria walls are still open, and the main entrance to the building is still open. Work continues to be going up on the outside, right on progress where we expect to be for the exterior of the building. Interior of the building, the walls, interior walls have all been completed, floors have been poured, and the one thing, terrazzo is starting to go down in the main hall. We have terrazzo floors. So there's not as much work that you see going on the first floor because while the terrazzo crew is working, nobody can be on that floor. So we have work going on the other areas of the building. HVAC is progressing nicely. Plumbing is very far along. And the electric, we're making good milestones with the electric right now. Transformer showed up a few months early, so they're able to start working towards getting the permanent power to the building. When I was in yesterday, they have feeders pulled to the panels, and I was starting to lay the main feeders on the main electric panel so they can start turning the electric on the sections of the building. That permanent power is required before we can take some of the next steps in equipment. The elevators are on site, but they can't begin installation for that permanent power. So we're really, I think we're on schedule with all those items. Cabinetry in the classrooms, for the most part, is completed. A few changes, they just need to put some very additional equipment in, but that's all moving along very well. And also in the auditorium, it was so funny, the contractors have come into the auditorium. All the rigging is in place, already the first stage is out, so the rigging for the backstage is completed. In the gymnasium, the baskets are out, even the nets are hanging on the baskets, just because the contractor who installs that doesn't want to come back after it's completing their installation. But we really are seeing good progress and we're on schedule for next year.
Great, thank you very much. And we also have budget update. Anything from our attention?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Sir. I'll do a quick update on the budget. So the project is approximately 65% complete for the project payments. The project budget is still trending positively despite the change orders that we have on the agenda tonight. The budget schedule is updated to reflect those change orders that we have in front of you, so that's all kind of built into what you see. As of after those change orders, the project contingency remains at about $1.38 million, so that is down from the $2 million that we started the project. noteworthy items are the remaining project allowances are $825,000. Financing costs will likely be below budget. So our final financing for this project will be below $10 million. And our borrowing fees on the last $10 million issues were around $180,000, and we still have about $580,000 remaining in the project budget. And township permit fees, while again, that's still an ongoing process, I think it's noteworthy to note that the total budget that they provide was $900,000, and we only spent about $200,000 of that to date. That does not mean we will necessarily be substantially under budget. The things are definitely trending in the right direction there. And then we do have a contingency item when we updated our amendment with Dewey for $125,000 that's in the project budget. That right now there is no work there to go against that funding source. So everything is trending very much in line with the budget. On the financing timeline, just to note that, so we do have one more borrowing, as I mentioned, for the project. We'll begin conversations with PFM for that final borrowing, but our current cash flow projections wouldn't put us in a position to need to borrow until June 2022, so we have some time to work that out. All right, thank you. Any comments or questions from members of the committee before we move forward? All right.
Just to follow up on the bond finance, I think that's a significant line item. Because right now we're showing a balance still of $600,000. We only have one more financing to go. So that will be a significant credit, I guess, that we will eventually take. I guess once all those fees are gone, then we'll see really what the financing will be. But I think that's very good news that the financing is really looking really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Continue to give us that for this protection
I wouldn't recommend that. I mean, we have a project that's already approved for construction costs related to the CARES funding. You have to get pre-approval from the state before you start spending any of this money. So I don't know that this is substantial enough. Again, I don't know if $100,000, but I don't think we need to try and get that approved as part of it.
Also, along those lines, we are just now getting the requirements for stakeholder engagement around the ARP funding. We're told that we'll have the final regulations in the next month. And then once we have those final regulations, then we can really start putting together our entire.
Just a quick reminder for everyone, we on mute microphone, you kind of got it. You got it close.
Okay, is this better? Okay, good question about the central. We see some pictures of the in the building. Is that going to be possible for staff and the community and others to see the progress, or is that still?
So our goal, we have taken staff through and we'll continue to take staff through. Right now, there is not a completely safe way to get members of the community in. Once some more of the concrete is poured, so that we can get people into the building in a more effective and efficient way, we'll look at doing some tours. We were hopeful to do some of that this summer. Deploying of terrazzo floors was actually a good thing, but that delayed that a little bit. So I would hope that in the next month or so, we can project out when we'll be able to take the community in. But as I'm looking at Mr. Trantis, now that with Mr. Trantis back with us, we are going to be shooting some videos. I believe I saw Mr. Ortiz. So Mr. Ortiz will be the Hollywood star in some of the videos.
Anyone else? No questions? All right, great, thank you for that update. Moving on, item B is change order B007, which is our regular update for COVID cleaning protocols. Anything different than usual on that one? All right, comments and questions from the group, Mike? Members of the committee prepared to move that one forward with the resolution?
Yes.
All right, thank you, so we'll move that forward. Next up, we have change order B008. As mentioned up front, we will not be discussing this in public, but our members of the committee prepared to move this one forward with the legislative.
Yes.
All right, and we'll move that forward. Item B, parking lot paving bid change orders, Bob?
Yes, over the winter, we bid out paving parking lots for Jarretttown, Portion, Thomas Fitzwater, and Washington. Since we awarded the bid was awarded to T. Shipper Contractors of Doylestown. Since we awarded the bid, we made some changes to the project that actually benefits additions to the district. And we needed to do a change order to include those. What we did add, there was no freezer at Jarretttown. The freezer for the building is actually mounted inside on a concrete pad. The freezer needed to be replaced. So we decided this was the perfect opportunity to remove the old freezer and put a new concrete pad in for the freezer. That was a major portion of this change order. Some other work that we had done, we removed the oil tank that was under the parking lot. We had some opportunities that we were able to take advantage of the timing to remove the old #2 oil tank for the heating system that was under the parking lot, dimmed out away. And that way we could repair the parking lot correctly. So there's money in this. That's also, those for compacting after the hole was dug and the tank was removed. It's an additional compaction to make sure we're not going to get any settlement in the area where the tank used to be. And one third minor item on this is there was a grate in the middle of the parking lot that we didn't consider bicycle friendly because the older style grates with the big wide openings where bicycle tires would get into, so we asked them to change that grate. But the total sum for this was $19,150.
All right, so to understand, it was our decision to increase the scope of the project. And I do remember several of those items were mentioned in the facility review we had. That at some time.
Yes, those items were mentioned in the facility report.
All right, other comments or questions?
Yeah, Bob, with that rate, with that increase, is that for the stormwater?
Yes, that's a stormwater grate. That's on our part of our stormwater
So
system.
we're removing the old one and putting in a new one.
Yes.
Could they inspect what's going on there, see if there's any damage that separates off that would possibly be doing necessary repairs?
Yeah, they were inside the grate. They didn't see any other damage. They did fix the supporting of the upper portion while they're milling. They made sure they took care of the bricks that were at the top and actually the grate at the right level.
Outstanding, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Art?
Did you replace the freezer or we use the same?
The reason for the change was the freezer actually stopped working after we went out to bid, so there was intention to replace it, but the freezer is not working. Kristen Deli, our food service director, she has bid and pricing for a replacement freezer. It will not be in place for day one, but she does have contingency plans until that comes.
I believe I remember in the facility before they were told that freezer and pad that clearly reflected the need for. I think it.
Yeah, the old tank, the section on that was removed. Was there a leftover from a previous project?
That was the oil tanks, going back, we believe that was replaced back in the 80s. There was additions to the building, and the oil tank was a place that was installed in the parking lot when they installed that there. So there were several additions to that building.
Right under the remaining oil tank, or is there?
That was the only underground oil tank.
Oh,
The small oil
so
tank.
we have nothing underground in the yard.
Yes.
Anybody else? All right, so members of the committee move this one forward?
Yes.
All right, thank you, move that forward. Next up, we have a proposed air quality study for the transportation facility.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just going to give a brief history of where we've been at here. So at the June Finance Committee meeting, Dewey presented the results of the proposed transportation facility feasibility study that we had done. And the conclusion of that presentation was the location is feasible to build the facilities that we need for our transportation operations. So that was the big conclusion that we were trying to figure out. But the site still remains ideal. It's on district-owned land that's not being used. And the concept, the budget that they presented, estimated the cost to be around $7.8 million, with the potential for cost reductions of about $800,000, and it included a contingency of $1.1 million. The one major item of feedback that we received from community members was about potential for air quality issues resulting from moving our transportation operations in proximity to Fort Washington Elementary School. The presentation, when Reed presented to us, he did note that the vehicles will be parked about 450 feet away from the school, and existing wetlands and trees would not be disturbed and act as a natural buffer. But we certainly did hear the concern and wanted to find a way to identify a solution to address it. So Mr. Lesser and I put our heads together and identified Element Environmental. They're a company in the business of doing air quality studies, and they currently do work for us. They do our air reports, which are our required asbestos reporting. And they do, when we spoke with them, they do have experience in doing outdoor type air quality studies like we're looking for. So they presented a proposal to us, which we have included as an attachment tonight. The testing that they are proposing they would do would include air sampling under normal conditions, so understanding the impacts of 309 that runs behind the building, or other possible impacts from upwind or downwind locations. They would look at air sampling with buses on location. So they would bring them in, do testing prior to them being there, bring them in, park them, let them sit, start them up, idle for the short amount of time they would, drive them out and test the air quality when that happens. And then they would let the air return to ambient conditions, and then they would do testing again just to understand the impact of the buses being there. So there were two options presented in there. One option was they would study it from 2 locations. The second option was studied from 3 locations on the site. Obviously, I think from option 2, we can study at 3 different locations would be the best solution. And what they proposed was the cost of $3,930 to do that study. If this would be approved, the timeline that we would be looking at, we would wait until all of our drivers and students are back in school, so the situation similar to what we would experience on a daily basis. So all of our drivers would be back. They would go do their runs and then take the vehicles over there, do the study, and then return. So they would do that in the morning most likely, and that's kind of the process they would run through. The other reminder beyond just this proposal is just to keep this in the forefront if we move forward with this. The other recommendations that we did make in that presentation were to do, and this was part of their proposal in the RFP process, to do a geotechnical study to study underground there, get a good sense of the underground conditions, and just get the next condition and land development with the Upper Upper Township. So that said, before you tonight is a proposal to do an air quality study where the proposed transportation facility would be by Fort Washington Elementary School. So, Mr. Lesser, if I missed anything, feel free to add.
Yeah, that is everything.
All right, comments or questions from the committee? Calvin?
Are we familiar with, or are you familiar with any other districts or companies that this group has worked with in terms of doing that?
I would be able to get a list of those, but yes, they do work with those school districts. In this area.
Anyone else? TJ?
Will this be on a scheduled day or are you going to pick a day or multiple days on the, you got some new conditions or whatever that you can directly?
It would be scheduled in advance. I don't know that we can necessarily schedule based on conditions if you have a date that's put out in the future. Certainly, we would work very closely with development and design to make sure it's not done on a day with adverse conditions that would have an impact on this project. So I'm certain they would take that into account.
To help with that answer also, the proposal, as I understand it, is explicit that this is meant to be a single day study. You put it all in a period of one day, presumably because it would be considered more expensive. It would require multiple visits. Any other questions? All right, members of the committee, you want to move this one forward? Do this?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I agree, so let's, we'll move that forward and vote on Monday. Pool heater purchase.
Yes, in the spring, the board authorized DJ Berberelli, consulting engineers to provide design work to replace the pool heater. This is an item, again, that is on our facilities assessment list for capital replacement. We've been running on a system that was temporarily done when the old heater failed several years ago. So DJ Berberelli has provided us a design, and the basis of the design was a Lockheed-Bar 1.5 million BTU heater. So when we looked around, we had options. We could either bid out this entire job, or when we looked at the heater itself, what they designed is a skid package where it shows up sitting on a skid, it just rolls in the door and connected. So it's a project that our staff is more than capable of handling. We can do this in-house. So fortunately, this Lockheed-Bar heater is on state contract through AFCO Supply, who is CoStar's dealer. So we can procure this through the CoStar's program through a CoStar's vendor. The price on the heater is $67,000. And again, it's something that we could purchase. There's a 12-week lead time on this, but we can purchase it, it would be delivered, it would be rolled right through the door, just connected in by our staff.
Comments or questions? Mike?
Bob, are there a significant amount of attachment hardware or other equipment that need to be purchased in addition to the essentially rolling heater? Or is this $67,000 all inclusive of installation costs?
This is all inclusive of all the materials that are needed. It's fairly straightforward. It's PVC plastic pipe connections, which we stock here for all our pool repairs. And it vents right through the outside of the wall of the room that would be in. So this does come with all that equipment. It is, everything is self-contained. What we need is on this quote. And some of the nice parts that you mentioned, this is a high efficiency boiler, 96% efficient compared to the ones we're using now, maybe 80 at best on a good day. And being indoors, it will be a little better. Our current heaters are outdoors, so they're less efficient than there. So this will be indoors. And one of the other selling features of this design was the pool water will never mix with the boiler. That's one of the issues that we have when we take our pool water up to the temperatures we heat. We tend to crystallize any of the materials that are there, any copper or calcium. That's where we're seeing our failure points. This system uses a heat exchanger, so there's a plate frame exchanger, so the boiler water is separate from the pool water, so they'll never mix. So we expect a lot less downtime, a lot less maintenance.
Okay, that was my second question. If you need want to know what's the difference between this heater versus the one that you had in place, and I think this is the third heater solution you've talked to, or?
The original building heater lasted until about 2017, and we had too many failures. So we brought in we set up a temporary heater system. It was a bit undersized, and they're more, they label them as commercial units, but they're more on the residential line, and the amount of time since we run our pool 24/7, we had a tendency to keep these heater components up, and we were constantly doing maintenance on them.
So it's not only more efficient, better design, kicks out more BTUs. It's just, it's a completely different animal from what we've had in the past.
Yes, we'll see more stable water temperatures, less maintenance on the heater. Again, the components are designed for this environment.
And
Can our staff remove the old heater and they would remove it? Disposable?
Yes, the original heater that was with the building was still here. No, there's nothing hazardous about it. We'll move that and we'll take that out to, we have scrap yards that we deal with, so we'll remove that to a scrap yard. The two pool heaters that we currently are using, we call them the temporary heaters, the outlet, we're going to keep those just in case. There's nothing wrong with them right now. We'll keep those in case we need to throw them in if something were to go wrong. We just need them for any reason that we'll have backup.
Ethan,
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that we're trying to find some that we find next solution for everything, ongoing debate, I think. In terms of the location indoors, is that anywhere near the deck, or is it totally separate from where students and spectators and everybody else is?
So we have a dedicated mechanical room, electric panels, and where the pool heater originally was located. That's in the hallway next to the restrooms there across the hall.
And do you have any sort of lifetime expectation for this improvement?
Yes, I would expect this, the typical lifetime of a heater of this nature would be the 15 to 20 year, better maintenance, replacement components, you can get more than that.
anyone else? All right,
How long does it take to replace, top up the old, new one?
Well, the nice part, the way our system's designed with the temporary heaters, we can actually install this by keeping the temporary heaters that we have in place run. The actual connections, again, everything's PVC glue. I would say that at most a 2-day installation, and that's just because of the outside vent to bring the fresh air into it. But everything else, the gas line is already in place, the water connections are in place, the electric's in place.
I think it's a great idea, Bob, to keep those two temporary heaters in case they're down.
so how long, I don't know if I caught it, how long is the transition from one year to another?
Oh, it would actually be, we would install this while the other heaters are currently running.
Great.
So there would be no downtime, it would matter turning 2 valves and trying to switch.
All right, anybody else? Well, I'm excited for the possibility of putting pool heater exchangers behind us, hopefully for a while. So I'm going to make the new move this one forward.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Next up, item 3, disposal of excess obsolete, non-repairable equipment, includes curricula, a lot of computers, and some furniture and other hardware. Any comments on it, Bob?
No, standard items that we do for every year are the obsolete electronics. We have an electronics recycling company that will come and collect all of our electronics. The past 2 years, we've deposited on what we've turned in. We've never had to pay them to remove anything. We've always, it's either break even or maybe a little bit on this, and we expect that for this list. And the others is typical furniture and older materials.
Any comments or questions? All right, member of the committee, prepared to move this one forward?
Yes.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Move that forward. Monthly financial reports, Andy.
Yes, thank you. So, tonight on the agenda, we have, there's 4 separate reports. We have our June reports and our July reports. What the June reports show you are basically estimates of where we anticipate closing the year out. As I'm sure many of you are familiar, we are closing a officially closing the year out through about August 30th as we prepare for our annual audit. There are certain items, services, invoices that we received that for services or goods received prior to June 30th. We have encumbrances, we're paying them, all that is charged back to the prior year. There's certain revenues that still get charged back to the prior year. So there's work that we're doing all summer long to close out our prior fiscal year. And our audit is scheduled to occur on September 16th and 17th. This year, there are others who will be on site for 2 days. So I don't intend to spend a ton of time on the June reports. All of the estimates remain in line with what we spoke about last year as we approved the final budget. So there's nothing significant to really review there on the June side, but I'm certainly open to answering any questions that board members might have. What I do want to spend a couple of minutes on is just walking through the July other financial reports package. So again, the treasurer's report for July is really just based on 1 month of the year, so there's not a ton of highlights there. But the other financial reports package for July, I do just want to walk through a couple of new pages just because it's been all forward for the new year. It's the same reporting that we reviewed last year, so it should have all looked very familiar. But if you just look through it, if you're following along online or in the packet, page 1 for July is updated with the new key highlights. Just as an update for where we are at as we closed out last year and approved the budget for 21-22. I did note on there that our financial position has certainly improved over the last 3 years, and we're in a very stable financial position. The future projections continue to show a growing gap between revenues and expenses based on our current assumptions. Budget assumptions are something that we will review in either the October and November finance committee meetings, so there is a full review that are done around those. Certainly they're in most every presentation or report that I've given, and it's in the budget narrative if anyone's interested in going through that. And the funding plan for capital projects must continue to be developed. So we started that last year. We did transfer $5 million to the capital reserve fund in the 2021 at the end of the year in June. So we do have about $10 million there, but we have about a $40 million list of projects that need to be done. So we're certainly making good progress on that, but we'll continue to work through that. Page 2 is rolled forward to the new year. So page 2 is the assessments as compared to the budget and how that's changing over time. So June is actually included in this report, and that's because we get these assessment change reports from the county on a month-by basis. So actually, when we're approving our final budget in June, we don't see the June assessment changes until July, so we don't have those for the final month. So if you're wondering why fiscal year closed in June, June's on this report, that's why we're on a month-by. We have over $9.7 million in new assessed value from new developments. So again, difference between assessed value versus market value. And assessed value is not new revenue, that's just what calculates tax revenue for the district. And about $7.7 million of that is related to the promenade. So we continue to see promenade significant assessments coming in from promenade. There's also a couple additional for that unclaimed in there as well. So from Madison Estates was actually this one. So also note, I think it is important to note that it is out there, the Prudential building is being marketed for sale as a vacant building, so I think that's important for us to be aware of. And note, Prudential building is the second largest taxpayer in the district, so obviously that's sort of an unknown on what happens with that property, but we will keep a close eye on that. Page 3 are tax collector reports for our current year, and it also compares to the prior year. So on the top of that page is current year. On the bottom half of the page is prior year. And I do think July collections were slightly ahead of the prior year. You can see we have about 10.9% collection rate as compared to 10% collection rate prior year. So tax collections are good in July. August is by far the largest month for tax collections, as that comes discounted at the end of August, so next month we'll be able to get a good sense of where we're at. Page 4 is the earned income tax. So July collections were, you can see they're well below July 2020, but very much in line with the prior years that you look at. So if you remember, I think that's important to know. If you remember last year, the IRS changed the tax filing deadline from April to July. So when that happened, we saw a large uptick in tax collections in July because that's when the filing deadline was moved to. So that was actually accounted for and adjusted for as we prepared the budget. But that's kind of why you see a very sharp decline from last year, July to July. Page 5 is transfer tax. July actually generated the second highest transfer tax revenue month over the last 4 years at $219,000. So transfer tax occur whenever there's a sale of a property, and we receive a 0.5% of the sale of the property for transfer tax. So that was a significant month, and that's attributable to last year we only had one commercial property transaction, and we had a large one occur in July of this year. So that accounted for about half of that revenue. And then there were also 47 total transactions, which is higher than our average monthly rate of about 35. And then the last page, as Dr. Yanni already mentioned, so our CARES grant funding tracking. So what this includes now is it's sort of like the plate clean from last year, and what you see on this report is just what's remaining for our CARES and ESSER grant funding. This is the federal stimulus dollars that will roll out in a bunch of different buckets in school districts. We are actively, we're still in the planning stages, as this is a multi-year process, but we're actively planning to use the all funds with a focus on the PCCD 2 and ESSER 1 funds, because we have until September of 2022 to spend those funds. From our perspective, we are very much focused on getting buildings, classrooms ready for this school year, so we are very focused on that. And now that we know we're all set up and ready to go for the beginning of the school year, more detailed planning can begin about how to spend those dollars now that the school is ready to be open. As Dr. Yanni mentioned, there's still significant guidance being issued about the planning and spending of the ARP ESSER 3 funds. So ESSER 3 are the ARP dollars that are specifically there's stakeholder engagement requirements as part of that. So not only are we still learning what the guidelines are around those dollars, but we're still learning about what all anyone that receives those funding, school districts specifically, are required to do as far as stakeholder engagement. So as that guidance begins to be finalized, we can start meaningfully planning for all of those funds. So that's my report on financials, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you. Comments or questions from the committee? Or the rest of the board? Charlie?
I'm just wondering, I know as soon as we finish one budget, we begin planning the next one. So we talked a little bit about the fact that we haven't planned anything for the capital project, knowing that we have $30 million of projects to be completed. Do you have a sense of when we need to start having that discussion?
So we actually do, in the 21-22 budget, we do have $1.9 million budgeted for the transfer to capital reserve. If you remember, that was, we went through a refunding process on some of our outstanding bonds that we had for prior capital projects. So we had a large one-time savings through very good conditions and low interest rates. So we did set $1.9 million aside for this year to transfer to the capital reserve. But future budget projections do not include any forecast. So that's really where we'll need to have that discussion as part of this year's budget process, is how much do we want to start to set aside on an annual basis for the budget. And I think there's a larger funding plan that we need to create. Is debt service part of the plan, surplus at the end of the year, something we want to consider. So I think that's happening right now, and that'll be part of the budget. Did that answer your question? No. Yeah. Right, okay. Any other details?
Two questions. The mention of prudential on page 2, is that just a placeholder because we know there are changes going to that or? Changes are expected?
I'm sorry, Betsy, I'm not sure I heard your question.
So on page 2, there is the mention of prudential, the prudential tax credit, but no number or anything. Is that just there as a placeholder?
Yeah, so that was the prior 2 years we had that. So that, we talked about it last year, that moved off. So I left it there just so you can see last year we had a number, this year it's 0. So that prudential credit from the tax settlement is over now. Last year was the last year again there.
All right, so it's need to identify the leftover from last year and not the reminder that things could potentially change if there's.
Correct, that's not anticipating any changes.
All right. And the other thing, I think you already talked about the discount period for taxes to perhaps for the benefit of the public, remind them of the schedule, because that will be different this year, isn't it? I mean, last year there was a change in the deadlines because of COVID and everything. This year, I think we're back to the normal schedule. Do you have those dates? Just so
I can go off the top of my head, but the schedule didn't necessarily change. What happened last year was the penalty period, which is from, let's say, roughly November 1st to December 31st. The board approved a resolution for a 0% penalty during that time period, and then the 10% penalty took effect on December 31st before it was turned over as delinquent. This year, the penalty period now, it's the same from after October 31st, but it's a 10% penalty starting on that day. So that's what changed.
yeah, so that's what I meant.
Yes.
Sorry for this, my question.
No, yeah,
But thank you.
that's what changed. Yeah. All right.
So, Andy, the prudential, it was an assessment appeal that spanned, I think, 2 or 3 years, which was a significant amount for the district. And I think it is now a much more favorable property to be put on the market, because the assessed value is less. Is that a correct statement?
Well, I don't know that I can necessarily answer that. I think if the taxes are lower than they were, then we'll look at that favorably, sure, but I don't know if that'll have an impact on the sale.
If it does sell, we would look at that property again. Will you able to do that? If for sale? To look at assessment? Would reassess it?
So I think, so you mean a district initiated assessment. So we don't look at any properties individually. So anytime the district, so we have policy around that. Anytime the district decides to go out to and do district initiated appeals, there's a process that's followed and certain criteria. So every property is evaluated the same across the district if we want to on an annual basis. And then if that property is identified as meeting the criteria, then we could move that forward for appeal. But every property is reviewed under the same criteria.
Okay. And my other observation is, I don't think I've said this for a number of years, that the structural deficit that usually exists at the beginning of the fiscal year looks like we don't have a structural deficit. In the budget for 2021, 2022, we have revenues of 107 million, and we have expenditures of 106 million. Is that an accurate statement, at least for this year?
Looking at it prior to transfers, that is correct. And then with the transfer, we have a deficit of $750,000. Yes, but that is a fair statement.
With regard just to the prudential assessment appeal, historically, every property is different. But it's often the case on big property like that sells, the owner, new owner, will, if there's an opportunity, will pursue an appeal. So we'll have to see what happens. It's hard to say what's going to happen to that property. It's a huge property, 90 acres. There aren't any others really like that in other developments. So predicting what will happen there, I think, is schools are. Any other comments or questions on the monthly financial reports? All right, thank you for that update. I would go to move those forward. Members of the committee, move those forward.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have 3 residential settlements appeals.
Not much to cover here, but just that a slight change in residential assessment appeals. I consolidated them into one agenda item rather than having them separately. I'll continue to do that. Commercial, I will list separately. But there are 3 before the board to consider tonight that are resulting in small reductions in annual tax revenue. So I don't have much more to say about them.
Comments or questions? Okay, we'll move that one forward.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Next up to our technology items, ViewSonic interactive panels. Is that the path? Yeah.
Good evening. In July, I shared with the board our intention to move forward with purchasing 10 interactive panels after being contacted by the vendor about price changes and possible delays with shipment. So I've shared with you information regarding our intent to purchase 10 interactive panels. The one change that occurred since that communication is we were able to negotiate a lower price than what I had shared with you. So we were able to save $100 per panel. So that gives us $1,000 in savings since the quote was shared with you guys. We're anticipating delivery of those panels early October, and hopefully they're in the classroom soon after.
Thank you. To clarify, the quote that's in front of us attached to the agenda is the current quote or that's the previous quote?
That should be the current quote.
Okay. And in the classroom, we bought these, typically we buy a lot more than 10.
These
Remind us what the story was with that.
Yeah, so these are for replacements. So as our overhead projectors go through wear and tear, they need repairs. So instead of investing money on the overhead projectors, we're going to try to make our classrooms uniform across and place interactive panels in all classrooms.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Teacher.
Sorry, do these new panels require extra training for people to use them, or can they be just mounted and used right away?
So they're very similar to the Avery board that you see here, which is what we currently have. With the ViewSonic panels, there is proprietary software that is very unique. They do offer training for our staff that is free. We are also building our in-house training as well for our staff. So we'll be sharing that out with those teachers who will be using the ViewSonic panels.
Anyone else? All right, the members of the committee will move that one forward.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Next up, the Cisco Smart Net renewal.
Again, this is information that was shared with you in July. So we're trying to consolidate our vendor support contract that was between 2 different vendors to one. This helps us tremendously as far as getting support and also vendors having a better understanding of the hardware that we have as opposed to trying to support vendors coming in from 2 different companies. So we were able to negotiate a contract with E+ to support our Cisco Smart Switch, and that goes into effect I believe in July.
Comments or questions? Okay, members of the committee will move that one forward.
Yes.
All right, thank you. And last up, the firewall subscriptions renewal.
Right. So as you guys know, one of the biggest problems that the tech folks and school districts and industry are facing is cyber attack, cybersecurity, and what have you. And so what I shared with you in July was our firewall update that will allow us the greatest level of defense against cyber attacks, cyber crimes. And so this subscription continuously updates virus definition. So as content is coming through our system, the firewall will prevent it from coming through that is going to be malicious in any form of information. And so this subscription goes into effect in July, and it'll take us right into next July. This is a great security measure to have for our district. It's one more layer to protect us against malicious attack on our
Thank you. And to clarify, this is, it's a new subscription, not new hardware, correct?
Yes, it's a subscription.
And it's a continuation of the existing subscription.
Yes.
Right. Any other comments or questions? All right, we'll move that one forward.
Yes.
All right, thank you. We are up to community input. So as a reminder that we haven't done this in person in a long time, the rules for community input are listed in the agenda. The microphone is over here. Please remember that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. Please state your name and where in the district you reside. There's a 4-minute time period. Please address comments to the board as a whole, or to the committee as a whole, or to the presiding officer. And thank you for your cooperation. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Veronica Lambert.
Veronica, step just a little closer to the mic.
Right.
You can go with that.
Is that good?
Yeah, there you go. Back.
I'm Veronica Lambert. I live in Upper Dublin, in Fort Washington specifically. I have my daughter with me who goes to Fort Washington Elementary. I'm here tonight to give some comments and have questions about specifically the transportation facility that's being surveyed or proposed or researched near our elementary school. I do want to thank the board for hearing the community speak at conducting or requesting the air quality study and for opting for number 2, the better option of the two. My questions for this study are whether this company has ever done any similar types of studies for schools or bus depots in the past. When they do their study, how many buses will be on location when the study is conducted? And will it be kind of close to a real life situation as what we can expect if this is ever built? And how soon do you think, or can you anticipate this study to be conducted in the future? With that being said, I personally am not for, strongly against actually this being proposed or not built, but near our elementary school. I think it is a safety and security hazard for the students. I did write to all the board members early on in June, and I did go to the meeting where the proposal was presented by Mr. Arif, I don't know his last name. I had a number of issues seeing it. I just want to say that the air quality is a huge issue for our children and the developing young lungs. And what I wrote in before is our daughter in particular suffers from asthma and BCD and goes into coughing convulsions when just breathing in a little bit of exhaust. And we've experienced this all summer when outside. So she's just one person. I think she's more sensitive than perhaps the other students, but she can be your air monitor in person if you need, and she can demonstrate what I can do to her. And I just find it kind of unbelievable that during this time when we're fighting a global pandemic that attacks the respiratory system, that we're not doing more to safeguard the health and safety of our children. I feel like we're going in the opposite direction. So on that note, my questions are, have we looked at other, I know that the properties are limited and expensive, but is this really the best option? Can we do more work? Do we have more time to wait it out? I just don't see the bus depot being next to an elementary school as the most optimal solution for us. Let me see if I have any other questions. So, specifically a question would be how many other properties were considered and to what extent, what research has been done. And I'm happy to offer my efforts or, to do some of that legwork for you, because I know it's very time consuming. So thank you. Just gonna see if Simone would like to share anything. No? Okay, she's gonna think about it, just to give her opinion about what it does to her. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Anita Brister, Fort Washington. I have two questions on the July financials. Its key highlights are on page 1. There's just still a few things I don't understand, even though I zoomed into all of the details. So this one goes back to Darlene's question. She asked about the one, or I guess Andy's answer, and it was about the bond refunding one-time savings of 1.9 million, and I think, Andy, you're saying that can be used for capital projects, right? So, no, we don't do dialogue, but anyway. What I don't understand is, and it's probably maybe it's an accounting thing that I have no clue about, why is that 1.9 million one-time savings not added into the total for capital reserve? And I guess the follow-up to that would be, wherever it is, even though it's not in with the capital reserve, am I correct to assume that you have 10 million plus another 1.9 million that can be used on capital projects, facilities projects? And then the other thing that I've been confused about for at least a year and a half is the assumptions that when you try to make, you don't have a chart in here, but under the key highlights, you have your assumptions that the budget deficit will increase to almost $5 million by the year 2024, 2025. So I'm wondering if, but then it says that you don't have the new real estate development revenue included. So one question would be, why wouldn't you try to estimate? I know an estimate's never going to be perfect, but based on what we see now, why wouldn't you try to estimate the real estate development? Because it seems like the 5 million would be way off without putting in your possible real estate development. So I'm just wondering if the next time you do an update, maybe you can put an estimate in there and you would all understand and not hold you to it if it's wrong. But then the other piece, I did bring this up, where's our time? Oh, there it is, sorry. And I know you're not going to discuss a contract tonight, or probably ever very much in public. Unfortunately, that seems to be the way it goes when there's a new teacher's contract. We are the last to know, the taxpayers. But certainly, before 24, 25, there's going to be a new teacher's contract. So I don't have any clue what assumptions are in there. But in other words, I'm sitting here wondering, gee whiz, are they assuming they're going to put 5% per year or 6% per year for a 3 or 4 year contract? And I'm not asking you to divulge that information, but I'm asking you to maybe put an asterisk or something when you do that chart again to kind of say, by the way, there would be a new teacher's contract. And you may not think it's important, but I don't know if Art would agree with me or not agree with me, but there's going to be new people on the board. There's already people on the board that have never done a contract. And you know what? You need to be aware of what's affordable. So it's just something that I think if you can't actually put it into your assumption, at least mention it. That I don't know if what you're thinking is, well, we're just going to carry the salaries all the way through 2025, or we're going to be adding 5, 6, 7%. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Jenny Patella, Ambler. And while I'm very grateful that you're finally having a meeting in person, I have to say the live stream is, I'm hearing, poor quality to the people that are at home, and I apologize for that. It was hard to hear you guys, even right here, and there's no one here. I would hope that maybe you can call the township and figure out how they're able to have a public meeting in person and on Zoom, and also on TV, because I think that would really help us. As far as the bus depot goes, You add 50 buses, you add a gas station, you add cars, the air quality's getting worse, bottom line. No need to get a study. The bigger issue is it's $7.8 million that we don't have, and we could rent somewhere for $400,000 a year for the next 20 years, just to make up for that $7.8 million without any interest for the debt, which we have to take because we don't have the money. My other point is the thing we can't talk about, all I gotta say is, if someone makes a mistake, I'm not sure why the taxpayers pay the bill for that mistake. Other thing is, on the assessment page, with the different assessments we get, can you please put the millage in there so we can calculate what that actually translates to? Those numbers look really big, 1 million, 9 million, whatever the number is, 900 million. But we multiply that by 0.003 and the dollar is a lot lower. So if you could put that assessment number in there and explain it, I think that would be helpful for people to understand. And I'm breathing heavy because of my mask and I'm trying to be loud. And there was one other thing, and I knew because I didn't write it down, that I forgot. But oh well, there'll be another meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Sorry, too short. All right, can you hear me? Thank you. Lisa Burns from Washington. So nice to see us all together in one place again. I'm glad I'm not in a little black box. I just wanted to go back to the CARES money. I'm always, every time I get on the call, I ask about this. We spent $500,000 already, and we're still to spend 1.8. I know we don't have a plan yet moving forward because you said you're still trying to get guidance for that, but it sounds like you do have an idea of what you could spend up to the EASERS 3. So I'm just curious why we haven't had a plan for the 114.96 and 550,000. Why we can't start putting a plan together about that money? Why are we waiting so long? I know you don't have to spend it all the way to 2023, 24, but we could be writing a plan now. Because it'd be nice to know where that money's going. In the chart here, it says, well, up here it says it's purchase needed for supplies and equipment in the new COVID reality. So I'd like to just understand what that means exactly. And then if it's supplies and equipment, we have salaries and benefits and substitutes and professional services. So I'm confused what we're spending it on and what we're not spending on. So clarification would be nice because 1.8 is, and 500, that's a lot. It's nice, and it's not on the shoulders of the taxpayers. So that's nice to have. I'm also concerned, or I also want to know if in fact the districts decide to opt in for this new, the Wolf administration's new vaccine, on-site vaccine, and possible testing, is there funds that we need to use to have that? And can we use these funds for that? Because it's specifically COVID related. And finally, I just also am concerned, put my taxpayer hat on now, concerned that we're getting ourselves in situations where decisions are being made and unilateral decisions are being made between the board and administration, and we're finding ourselves in 1, 2, 3 lawsuits now. And what I don't want to see happen, I don't think anybody does, but is have a community member or a parent say, wait a minute, they're making these decisions. Are these decisions legal decisions? Can they force some of these mitigation measurements? There's no emergency order from the governor. So the next thing we know, do we have another lawsuit on our hands? And financially, I don't think we're ready for that. So I just wanted to express that as a taxpayer. Again, you know, the decisions that are being made trickle down, and I just want us to be sure we're making them for the right reasons. So, and if you get a chance, just a clarification on the CARES would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, with that, I will close community input and we will see if there are comments.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Sirota. I'll ask Mr. Leckman to talk about some of the financials. One of the questions about can we use some of the ESSER money and the CARES money for on-site vaccine clinics and testing. The vaccine clinics are at no cost. So we did 2 in the district last year, 1 at the middle school, 1 at the high school. We're hopeful to do another round of vaccine clinics right at the beginning of the school year. There'll be no cost for those. We'll also set up vaccine clinics when the vaccine is available to students under the age of 12, but there's no cost associated with that. I know superintendents are meeting tomorrow with the Montgomery County Office of Public Health, and I know business administrators and HR directors are also meeting to talk about where funding would come from if schools or when schools opt into the testing program. So more information on that. I would expect that to be come out in a future update. Mr. Leiter, can you address some of the financial questions?
Certainly, yeah. I think I wrote them all down, but certainly keep me honest if there's something else I need to cover. So the transportation facility, Element Environmental did note that they have done similar type studies. We're not aware of any that have been done at school districts. There are local school districts that have transportation facilities in much closer proximity to their schools, and we're not aware that anyone has done any studies there. So yes, they've done studies, not at schools that we are aware of. The number of vehicles would be all of the vehicles. So every vehicle that's out on the road the day we choose to do it would end up going there and be studied. So it would be a very like situation that if the facility was there, that's what we would be replicating to the best of our ability. Timeline would be as soon as possible once school starts. So working with Element Environmental, we would try and get it scheduled as soon as we can in the September timeframe to get that done. So we wouldn't be looking to wait. The $1.9 million in the bond refunding. So the way that it works, and I hope I explain this properly. So we recognize one-time savings in this year's budget from the refundings that we did. So the way we handled that, or my recommendation, the way it was approved in the budget was we have a budgeted line item for a transfer to the capital reserve. So we have all of our revenues, we have all of our expenses, and then we have a budget line item in the general fund to make a transfer. What we will do this year is the board will have to formally approve to transfer that money into the capital reserve. So yes, when that happens, we will have $10 million plus the $1.9 million in the capital reserve. So that's why you don't see it reflected that way right now. It has to be a formal board action now that even though it's in the budget to transfer those funds. Assumptions under new development, so yes, I do not include those in there. I think my take on that I've spoken about at these meetings is I'm not comfortable, me personally, putting revenue into a budget that doesn't exist yet. We do, in the presentations that I give, there is a chart around the new developments and the estimated new revenue that will be generated from those new developments. So you can see what that number is. It's just not built into the budget. So certainly we've talked about, yes, the deficit is growing to a number, and we expect new developments to bring in a certain amount of revenue, but it's not built in until it actually materializes through assessments. New contracts, certainly, I mean, we can certainly highlight contract end dates and make sure that's in there. So that's something I would definitely be open to making sure it's very clear. I can certainly enter the millage rate on the assessment page. I think that's fair. I think it's also important to note in the budget presentations that they do include the formula for how it's calculated. So that is out there, but I'm happy to include the millage rate on that. And then under CARES, it's something that the ESSER dollars and the PCCD dollars is something that we've been talking a lot about. The one thing I will say, yes, it's $1.8 million. ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 are the only two buckets of money, and the largest buckets of money, that allow for construction-related expenses. So ESSER $3 are the ARP that require stakeholder engagement. So we're not, districts aren't in a position to go start spending that money until a plan is fully developed around them, and we go get stakeholder engagement, and we're still figuring out what all that looks like. But ESSER 2 does not require stakeholder engagement per se. So that's $1.6 million that could be put together to potentially do air improvement construction within buildings that's allowable there. So we're trying to be very thoughtful in truly, I know you haven't seen the full plan yet, but we really are trying to be thoughtful about how we're spending that money. We had the facility condition assessment done, and in that assessment, a lot of the early year projects were related to upgrading some systems that are starting to reach the end of life in some of our elementary schools. So there is potential to use these dollars for to reduce the $40 million that we have for capital projects. So that we're trying to build that all out and package it together. So we're really focused right now on ESSER $1 and PCC $2, which is about $220,000. So I know that doesn't fully answer your question, but that's sort of the planning that we're doing behind the scenes.
Related to the question about sound quality, we were monitoring, we had folks watching at home so they could let us know how the sound quality was coming through. You might have noticed maybe about 30 minutes ago, the microphones were turned up. So we're getting reports that the sound is much better now. Jason Trantis, who does all of our video editing, will make sure that the sound is enhanced as well before the recording goes on our YouTube page. The other question about lawsuits as it relates to health mitigation efforts. The county, Montgomery County, actually wrote into their health code that we are required to report every case of COVID from our students and staff. That's not, it is not a reportable illness in every county, but it is written in Montgomery County's health code. One of the benefits of the masks, and I'll say this as plainly as I can, I think we can all agree that COVID's bad. I don't think there's ever going to be universal agreement on masks. Last year, if students were within 6 feet of each other, they were identified as a close contact. Close contacts had to be excluded for 10 to 14 days. Correct usage in wearing of masks will allow kids to stay in school, because if you come in contact with someone that is infected, even within the 3 feet that's recommended, that student or those students do not need to be quarantined and sent home from school. So our goal, very simply, is to make sure that we have 5 days of in-person instruction all year long, and only have kids out of school when it's absolutely necessary. I was happy to see that our positivity rate dropped a percentage this week when we were able to see our municipality specific data this week. So that's an encouraging sign. The incident rate is still high. We'll keep updating the community every Tuesday as to what that data is and what the implications of that data is. So you'll get communication every Tuesday. One more comment about other locations for the transportation facility. The district has, over the years, looked at a number of properties. The district won't be releasing a list of those properties, just because if we find ourselves in a position where we have to buy one of those properties, we need to have some negotiation power. In terms of investigating those properties, we did a feasibility study on the parcel of land near Fort Washington. A feasibility study would need to be done anywhere we build to understand what the land development requirements would be, how we comply with the land development requirements of the township. That feasibility study was about $20,000, Mr. Lipman, $25,000. So as we go through this process, we need to understand how to comply with the township's land development. So any of the properties, any other properties that we would evaluate, we would need to do a feasibility study. And so after we get the air quality results. We'll be having another discussion at a finance meeting or at a legislative meeting. And then we'll be asking the board for some direction about, do we continue to explore other properties that are available or potentially available, or do we continue to rent, or do we move forward with the transportation facility? But unfortunately, we can't release a list of properties that have been looked at or partially evaluated over the years.
So I just want to follow up to that. There was a question, do we have more time? Can we look at other properties? And we are continuously considering other properties, not necessarily to the degree of actually doing a feasibility study, which would make that information potentially more public than we're ready for. Yes, nothing is off the table yet, or no decision has been made. There is certainly more time if other properties do manifest. We're happy to consider them. So if people have ideas for properties, please share them. But yeah, this is the one we moved the furthest ahead on so far. And there was a question on what estimates are, what assumptions are in place for teacher salaries going beyond the end of the current contract, because the projections go beyond the end of the current contract. You know the answer I have here?
It's a simple placeholder of 3%. I mean, it's not based on necessarily anything. It's not factoring in 5, 6, 10%. It's just a standard across the board, 3%. That's not even the projections for every single salary line item and how beyond the contracts.
All right, thank you. I did also want to make one other comment. Somebody commented that it's great that the CARES and ESSER dollars are not on the shoulders of the taxpayers, and I think I understand what the commenter meant, but I just want to clarify, it is on the shoulders of taxpayers. That comes out of the federal budget. The federal budget is funded by us. It's funded by taxpayers. So it just comes through a different path. It is nice that it's not on the shoulders of the Upper Dover School District budget and the taxpayers that fund that directly, but it is still funded by taxpayers. Any other comments, questions, thoughts, members of the committee or the board? All right, so with that, let me announce that our next Finance Committee meeting will be Wednesday, September 8th at 6 p.m., hopefully live. With that, we are adjourned. We'll take about a 5-minute break and reset for the policy meeting.
Thank you. Oh, there you are. I tried to download it too. I got it. It's like unzipping and it goes back. Yeah. All right. Good luck tomorrow. Well, it's actually Friday. Oh, okay. Sean finally made up with you? No. Yes. He's at least told me that he hasn't done it yet. Yeah. He's telling me.
Board members, if we could reconvene. Moving us along. Okay, very good. I'd like to call to order the policy committee meeting. Tonight it is August 18th and it is currently now 22 or 3 after 7. And this evening I do not have any specific welcome comments, but I would like to then turn it over to Dr. Yanni. Any communication announcements?
There are no announcements this evening.
All right, very good. We have one set of June minutes for approval. Anybody have a second on that? I'd like to make a motion to approve. Forward.
Second.
Forward. Sorry. Little out of practice. We're going to move forward the minutes unless anybody has any objection. Try that. Everybody's nodding in assent. Very good. Thank you. All right. See how we do here. So we're moving on then to our policy recommendations, and we really just have first readings this month. We'll start off with policy 006, copy of meetings. Sorry, not copy of. Boy, it's been a long time, my apologies. Meetings, we're talking about meetings.
Board Operating Guideline 006, this BOG articulates how the board holds its meetings, how the meetings are run. Over the summer, there were some amendments made to the Sunshine Act, the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act. And we thought it was prudent to make sure that those revisions were put into BOG 006. If you look through the guidelines, the operating guidelines, there is a requirement that agendas must be posted at least 24 hours prior to any public meetings. That applies to both committee meetings and legislative meetings. And that agenda cannot change unless the majority of the board acts to change those agendas. So in other words, what the amendment is trying to do is to make sure that there is better transparency across the Commonwealth about what is on an agenda and when changes can occur on an agenda. Our agendas always go live 48 hours in advance, so we already comply with the 24 hours. But really for us, making sure that we don't make any changes to that agenda within 24 hours. And as our executive leadership team does, we always review the agendas, and the board always gets a preview of the agenda before it's made live to the public. So again, the only changes to Board Operating Guideline 006 is some language to comply with the updated Sunshine Act.
Thank you. Any members of the board have any comments or questions? I have one question. Does
that include attachments, or is it just the?
So the way it's written, it's just the agenda, but we always make sure that all of our attachments are public as well, and we'll continue to do that. So we make sure everything is truly transparent.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, go please. Okay, thank you, Dr. Yanni. I would like the committees, okay, to move that to a second reading at our next policy committee. Everybody good? Very good, thank you. All right, moving on to policy 112, guidance in school counseling programs.
This policy articulates how we are to run our guidance and school counseling programs. If you look at the revisions, under definitions, we actually define what a guidance program is. And that's, should say, counseling, not counselor, counseling services that focus on the academic, social, emotional, and vocational needs of students. And that's a generally accepted definition right from the Department of Education. In the guidelines section, number 2, it used to say, enable students to significantly benefit from their academic program, but the generally accepted language is to receive maximum educational benefit. So that's not really a substantive change, but that's just something, as we are going through our policies and we're looking at areas that we can improve and enhance the language, we're making sure that we do that. Those are the only 2 instances of revisions in this policy.
Thank you. Committee and board colleagues, any questions or comments? Mrs. Sugar?
Yeah, the additional social, is that just the semantics, or does that fundamentally change the work that is going on?
It's part of the accepted definition. Social has always been a part of content program.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, that's a pretty straightforward item. Thank you, Dr. Young, for preparing that. Committee members, are we comfortable with moving this to second reading at our next meeting? Very good, thank you. Next, we have policy 115, career and technical education.
So our Career and Technical Education Center is Eastern Center for Arts and Technology. Did I get that right, Dr. Lopez? For semantics, we added a parenthetical phrase, herein referred to as Eastern throughout the policy. When we think about career and technical education, the curriculum that is provided is developed by industry standards and by professionals at Eastern. So if you look under authority, it used to say career and technical courses of studies interwoven and articulated throughout the curriculum of the school. We want it to be really clear in this policy that those standards are interwoven through the work done at Eastern. So we clarified that language. Then after number 3 in authority, in order to maintain a program of career and technical education, it says the board shall in cooperation with Eastern, but it's really the district in cooperation with Eastern. We need to make sure that our students who are attending Eastern meet their credit requirements, not only to be successful at Eastern, but also to be successful and to remain on track to graduate here in the district. On the next page of that policy, through our Superintendent's Advisory Council with the Executive Director at Eastern and the industry professionals there, we make sure that all of their programs are operated under the state plan for career and technical education. Each of the sending schools to Eastern have a board member that sit on their joint operating committee as well. There are not many changes, but as we are going through, we're in a good spot with our policy book, and as we're going through, there are some of these clarifications that we need to make. So again, nothing incredibly substantive, but still we wanted to bring it to the board's attention.
Thank you. Board members, comments? Mr. Sherman?
I have one on this one. On the new language under delegated responsibility, where it says that the superintendent or designee shall ensure the programs are operating in conformance. The new language is programs in which students are enrolled are operating in conformance. I think we should be explicit there that we mean in which Upper Dublin students are enrolled. I don't want it to be your responsibility to ensure that programs outside of that are necessarily in conformance.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Mrs. Shepherd?
Yeah, when it says accessible to regularly enrolled students, that means they can participate.
Yes,
They
so
can enroll as students. What were to happen, or maybe this is, I'm not sure if this is part of this policy or not, but should we live in COVID times? What happens in terms of, do the rules that apply for students in terms of mask and all that kind of stuff apply in the same way at Eastern? Or is that fully, is that the role of the boards, the Eastern boards, to ensure that it is consistent with the all the spending districts?
So Eastern has their own, that's a good question. Eastern has their own health and safety plan. And when our students go to Eastern, they're required to follow whatever parameters Eastern has in place.
So the access in that sense is determined by their administration.
Yes.
And that is coordinated through the boards?
It's coordinated to the maximum extent possible via the superintendents, but with 8 sending districts, there are some differences in our health and safety plans and Eastern's. But Dr. Klesnarski, who's the executive director over at Eastern, has done a really good job of communicating with students and families to let them know what the expectations are when students go to Eastern.
And then the other point that I have about this accessibility is timing, especially as we're talking about scheduling or a schedule change for the high school in the future. How does that work? Are you coinciding our schedule with our schedule in line with the Eastern schedule? And things you know a little more about that?
So right now, our students can only attend Eastern in the afternoon sessions. My expectation with the new Upper Dublin High School schedule that will be put into place in school year 22-23 is that we must be able to send students in the morning session and the afternoon session. Because there are some programs that sometimes don't run in both sessions, and that could mean that Upper Dublin students don't get a chance to vie for a seat in that program. So that is one of the tenets that I know Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Schultz are keeping, at the cognizant level as they're looking at the schedule.
No, thank you, because that word accessible means a lot of different things.
It does. The way it's used in this policy is that if a student is enrolled in our school district, we need to make sure that they have access to attend Eastern. And I think, this year, this school year coming up, I think maybe our greatest number of students at Eastern, I think we're at 50, 54, 53, I don't have my contacts in, 53 or 54 students. For several years, we hovered around 40 students. It dipped a little bit, but I think with Dr. Klesnarski's influence over at Eastern, there are some different programs being brought to Eastern, and I think it's becoming more and more attractive to students.
That's really important.
Thank you. Anybody else with comments or questions for this item? All right, seeing none, is everyone on the committee comfortable moving this to second reading?
Yeah.
Great. With the change, yes?
Yes.
Duly noted. Thank you. And our last item for this evening for discussion, policy 210, use of medication.
There's a lot going on in this policy. There was a lot of language that, despite just looking at it in 2020, when we looked at other school districts' policies, some of our language wasn't as tight as it needed to be, and some of our language didn't go far enough for example, students with diabetes that need to regulate their insulin levels during the day. Our policy didn't go far enough. The pleasure of the committee, I can walk through what's here. I can answer some specific questions, and then I can also talk about what we'll be moving to an AR, because this, Dr. Perez and our nurses will be working on a pretty substantive administrative regulation to go along with this policy. So do you want to go through it? Do you want to ask questions about it?
I almost don't even know where to begin. Why don't we just do a summary, brief?
Well, I think, Mr. Schroeder, did you have?
Well, I had one particular comment I wanted to make, but perhaps,
Go ahead.
Just start there.
Why not?
All right. It's specifically, under, one of the definitions is for asthma inhaler. It is the only example, that I see here that is specific to a condition. And I wonder if we can find a more generic way to phrase it. I mean, inhalers are used for a variety of purposes beyond asthma. They're, as noted here, they're used for asthma, for non-acute emergency relief as well. So I understand that the reason for the specificity here, but it just stuck out to me as the one that's not like the others.
What I can do is work on some language that talks about, phrase it as some sort of rescue medication, emergency medication, and then we can list a set of examples that we could say, including but not necessarily limited to. Because one of the things that we noticed when we looked at this policy, even for students that regulate their insulin, it's not always finger pricks and shocks. There are also nasal sprays for diabetes. There's nasal sprays and other types of administration of medication for students with seizure disorders. So I can go ahead and tweak that language and then again put some examples there and we can phrase it as including but not necessarily limited to. If that sounds good.
Yeah, I think that would work.
Since we're sort of dive. Anybody else have some, Ms. Schrader?
I'm a little confused about that line that says non-medical school personnel and then in parentheses trained diabetes personnel. Is that just the trained diabetes personnel, or is that really any teacher who is taught how to use an EpiPen or anything else? Because I believe that every teacher knows how to instruct it and practices every year how to do that. So I'm not sure what that refers to.
So one of the things that Dr. Perez and I have been talking about, there has been over the years some disagreement about who can do certain things in the medical arena. So if students are taking a prescribed drug at certain times during the day, that's typically only given by the nurse. But we have a number of people in buildings that are trained to give emergency medication, EpiPens, nasal sprays for different things. We have some students with seizure disorders and other disorders that that a number of us are trained. So it's typically the building principals, some counselors, some instructional assistants, teachers. Teachers do have the right under school code to refuse to be part of that team, but we always make sure that there are enough people that stay in proximity to those students that giving that emergency medication is not an issue.
But then what is the purpose of the trained diabetes personnel in parentheses? Here, on the second page.
So in the line directly underneath, it specifically says supervise to perform diabetes care tasks.
I missed this when I said earlier that asthma was the only specific condition I noted. So my error there, but.
So again, there, I think we can give some examples there. We really looked at this because we are seeing an increase in students with diabetes, and not type 2 diabetes, but type 1 diabetes. And so it's becoming more of a concern from our school nurses, but also our student services office and our principals. So if it's okay with the committee, then we can do the same thing that we would have done on that other page by saying including but not necessarily limited to, and then we can put some examples there.
Yeah, I think that will make that clear. I don't want to communicate this, so argue that make it clear.
Anybody else?
It seems to me that'll work. Part of the confusion might be that the parenthetical after the quotes, non-medical school personnel includes the trained diabetes personnel, but that implies that there are other things as well. So I think making that clarification will help there. And we may not even need that parenthetical after the.
No, that's what I thought.
Yes.
Right.
It's a good catch. So as you can imagine, when we review these policies, no matter how many eyes get on these policies, even when they come here for review, we always find things that we want to discuss. So thank you for that.
Ms. Zaidi?
I think it would be great at some point to hear from the nurses. There's a lot in here, you know, some of these bigger buildings, how this all could play out.
Absolutely. So there are a couple other medical policies that we'll be looking at this year, and we're actually going to invite the nurses to come to that. So you'll be able to hear from them then. And then also as we look at our social emotional programming, the nurses will be part of that as well. Because the role of a school nurse, when I think back to when I was a building principal, so this is going back to 2010, the role of a school nurse was really to dispense medication to a limited number of kids, and then they saw kids for, stomach aches, sore throats, scrapes and bruises on the playground. Their role is far more expansive now than ever before, and we're really lucky to have what I consider some of the best certified school nurses that I've had the pleasure of working with. So I do think it would be to their benefit once they're back in the school year for them to attend.
I have an item, bottom of page 2, second to last paragraph, around the documentation from parents and physicians. So it's been my personal experience with kids who receive medication that there's a requirement on an annual basis to resupply the information. And I just want to have a little discussion around if it is a chronic condition, is that a step that's required? And if it is required that it's annual, we need to state it here, the timing isn't stated.
So we typically do have either 504s or individualized health plans for students with chronic conditions. So let's make sure that we put some language in there that says that at least annually.
Right. I think that will help parents, because I know every year I forget, every year I'm surprised, even though
And that's something, when you think about the number of students that have some significant health issues, that number increases each year. And so when you think about one of the essential roles of our school nurses, this is one of their big things that they'll spend the first couple days back at school before kids come in, reviewing all of those plans and making sure that they reach out to parents for information where they need it.
I also think Ms. Zaidi brings up an interesting point about just having a conversation with someone from the nursing team, maybe Rebecca Reed, or somebody who's kind of coordinating, because there have been episodes of medication refusal that I've heard about through the grapevine somewhere, and would be curious about how that would be handled with parent communication. Anybody else? Mr. Serrano.
Two things, I don't have a recommendation here as much as a question. Where am I? So in the middle of the big green section under guidelines, there's a small paragraph, shall be the responsibility of either the parent, guardian, or responsible adult to inform the school nurse of any medication. Who's the responsible adult in this? Who would be responsible adult if not the parent, guardian, for which this would apply?
So one of the things that has emerged over the last couple of years is that we have caretakers that are working with students that have some authority over the student's educational program, and also being emergency contacts, and also responsible for some health things. And a lot of times it's a grandparent or another family member, and it's not the parent or guardian, but the parent or guardian has signed a release for that person to act on their behalf.
Okay, so in this case, that responsible adult is not parent guardian. Do have responsibility to inform the school nurse, but they don't necessarily have authority to approve medical treatments and that kind of thing, right? That is
Correct.
For parent.
Correct.
And then my other one is in the very next paragraph, where it talks about off-label medications. It says, in these situations, the recommendation of the district physician consultant will be final. Do we have, is this something where we would consult with somebody on that particular case, or we have a standing district physician who is defined?
We actually have, you'll approve the name of that person at an upcoming meeting, but we do have a district doctor that.
Right, and so that's the person we're talking about. I didn't remember the name of that title. I'm concerned that with the language as written, that it could be that, and I'm not saying this would happen, but if the language allows for potentially the district to fish around for a consultant who will say what we want them to say, as opposed to using the static or pre-approved position. So I think we should be careful to use a title here that matches with that standing position.
Fair enough. Yeah, I don't think that, like, to echo what you said, I don't think it would happen. I don't want anyone to think it would happen, but we can make sure that the district doctor is mentioned by title. Because every year, you'll approve a district doctor and a district dentist.
Oh, great, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Looking around. All right, it was a good discussion. It's a pretty substantial bit of editing there. Thank you, Dr. Yanni. That was quite a lot of work.
It's all good. It's why I'm here. I think this policy goes in the right direction of making sure that we have the right procedures in place, especially as we continue to see an uptick in the number of students with some significant health concerns.
It certainly feels like we're going in the right direction now. So with that said, committee members, are we prepared to take this with the discussion points we've addressed tonight and some upcoming edits to second reading next meeting?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Very good. Well, thanks very much for the good questions.
And maybe we can entice one of our nurses to come to the next meeting as well.
All right, thanks so much. That brings us this evening to community input. I invite members of the community that have any comments or questions to come to the microphone, state your name, where you reside, and you'll have your 4 minutes to ask. All right, seeing none, I'll close community input. There were no questions submitted to Ms. Evans online either, so I should have mentioned that first.
I just have just one announcement. So tonight we only had first readings. That's why the meeting was brief tonight. So for anyone who might be watching, I don't want to think we've glossed over anything. Starting next month, we'll have this board operating guideline and the policies for second reading, and we'll have a host of first reading policies. And so we have some heavy duty policies that'll be coming up. So I think there'll be some good discussion.
So you're saying I'm not getting off easy for the last few months?
No.
Okay, all right.
Pack an overnight bag.
Dr. Davis, an announcement?
Well, no, I just want to clarify, this is going to the meeting on Monday night for our first reading. You mentioned something about a second reading. I just want to clarify.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I say second?
I've been saying they were going to second reading for the next policy committee meeting.
First?
Going to go to first read for
For the legislative, and then next month we'll do second reading here and then second reading.
Yes. I was just skipping that step because I was assuming that sorry. Got it. What Dr. Davis said is correct. All right, I think we've got everything. Anybody else last comments before we adjourn? Thank you for your time. We have our next policy committee, August 18th, 2021, immediately following. Oh my gosh. September, sometime in September, we will have a policy committee meeting. I apologize, I can't even find it. There we go, September the 1st. Good night, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.